Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis.
Hey, welcome to the show, Leadership is Changing. What we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Leaders everywhere confront similar obstacles because people are people, but everywhere you go, leaders are overwhelmed, disrupted, and under pressure. They run from email to email, meeting to meeting. Many leaders are not changing quick enough, which means they run the risk of becoming irrelevant and being left behind. Perhaps the show is taking our listeners' leadership to another level by finding their balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. I believe we don't have enough effective leaders in the world today, and if we can get the leaders to step up and lead change, then they can inspire real change. Hey listeners, it's now time to adapt in our fast-moving world. Welcome to the Ask Denis freestyle episode. Great to have you with me again. This is a weekly episode that we do. So twice a week we do an interview with different leaders around the world. And the freestyle episode is where I'm asked a question by our listeners, or I share my thoughts, insights, and experiences from working with leaders around the globe. And so it's really good to have you here with me today. And really going to encourage you to take notes as we go through today's topic, which is be a deliberate leader. So how's the month one gone for you? You know, we've completed month one. How's it gone for you? What was your biggest win in that month? And what was your biggest insight or learning that you had? If you haven't already done a reflection on the month, I'm going to really encourage you to go ahead and do that. Because if you do that on the month that's just passed, that's where you're going to learn from things. That's when you can go and do things differently and move forward. Hey, I've just celebrated my father's 80th birthday, and we had an event whereby we had a small group of people with us. And we held it at a sporting event or venue because he's a sports fanatic and he's 80 years of age and he's still working. An amazing kind of work ethic that he has, but he just loves bringing passion to what he does. And we had person after person come up and speak about him and recognize him for what he's been as a leader, as a father, as a family member, and just really quite cool to see and hear the different things or tributes to him in his 80th birthday. But the one thing that kept coming up was his energy and him being deliberate in what he's done in his life, and he continues to do deliberately as well on a daily basis. So as we get into today's topic, let's talk about that because the topic is be deliberate as a leader. And what is a deliberate leader? What does that mean and so forth? So some leaders, what they do is they work the month, the quarter, the year, and they wonder where time goes. In fact, some of you, if I use another analogy, when you're driving a car, you may go from home to the office or office to home as an example. Have you ever wondered at times, hey, how did I get here? And you just don't actually remember the journey that you've actually just been on. For a lot of us, that is whereby we've actually done it unconsciously, or as I call it, you're being on autopilot. So you do things and some of you just do it because of the sake of doing it, or you just do things unconsciously because it's just day in and day out stuff. In fact, some of your decision-making is what I call on autopilot or unconscious. In the morning when you get up, let's say that you put on a pair of pants, trousers, whatever you call it in your country, slacks. If you put on a pair of trousers, do you put your left leg in first or your right leg? Do you have to make a decision on that? Or is that just something that you do automatically on autopilot? I bet some of you tomorrow morning are going to be thinking about, oh, it is the right leg, Denis. No, it is the left leg, Denis. And so it'd be interesting to do that. So what I've just done is raise your awareness about how you are making some decisions and whether you are being deliberate or not and whether it's on autopilot. But the other question I've got here about being deliberate as well is that are you really bringing your best, your A game to the role, to the team, to the organization, and to your customers? In fact, to yourself. Are you really bringing the A game here and are you being deliberate about it? So how do you do things deliberately? So I went out and actually just researched to see what the meaning of deliberate means. Done consciously and intentionally is the meaning that they have. Now, being conscious, well, that's about being present. being in the moment. You see, you bring different energy to the situation. It's how you show up and being present at the moment. You'll notice things that you possibly won't notice when you're on autopilot. So you'll probably have a better eye for detail or attention, and you'll actually pick up on things. You might be able to sort of understand people's body language or the words, the language that they use, and pick up on some things there. So being conscious is really important about being present and being in the moment. Now, being intentional is key. Now, this can relate to many different areas as we talk about it. When you go to a meeting, do you go in there and sit down and just take up a seat? For some people, they're just an empty suit in a seat. In other words, they're attending. And if you actually think about it and actually ask people, what have you been up to today? Oh, I've attended so many back-to-back meetings. But what have they actually achieved in those meetings? So the question I always ask people that I work with is that when you're going to a meeting, what's your intent? What do you want to get out of that meeting? Are you going to go there and just take that seat up, or are you going to go there with an intention? And what is it you wanted to do and get out of it? What questions? What's 1, 2, or 3 questions you might want to ask in that meeting? So in other words, be deliberate about the things that you're asking. Because when you do that, your presence, your ability to ask some questions, which more than likely are going to be questions that others are thinking about in the meeting, but they don't have the courage or the intent, or they're not being deliberate. Why? Because they're on autopilot. Get off autopilot, be deliberate, and ask some powerful, open-ended thinking questions. Another situation is where you are with your team. Be present, focus on the conversation, listen to what they say, and be authentically interested in what they're saying. Because you see, people can pick up on you whether you're authentic or not. People can pick up whether you're present or not. I mean, I say things and people go to me sometimes, oh, yeah. And it's a question to them. Or I've said something but should have rocked them a bit, but they not listening. And so the thing here is make sure you're present with people. Don't be on your mobile phone, your tablet while you're talking to people. Put it down. Even if you're taking notes and you're into a situation where the conversation needs your attention highly, a lot, put the pen down. Just to be there with people and talk. Intentionally is whereby if we ask really good questions and you get your team to respond, but here's the other intentional side of things, or being deliberate as well. Give them the space to think about the answer and deliver the answer. Now, for a lot of people, they might just push people's suggestions and ideas to the side. So if you're smart and you're being deliberate and you have an intention to help people, but also help you and the organization, then ask good questions and then get your team to respond, because they come up with some really great ideas. You can't be everything to everybody. You don't have to bring all the ideas to the table. They may have some really good ideas, but give them the space to be able to do that. Intentionally delegate and get others to step up. You might be surprised in what they get on with, and you don't always have to do everything yourself. Here's another analogy about intention. What about networking? Not many people are very good at networking. But the thing here I would ask you is, what's the important aspect of leadership? One of them is going to be networking and doing it very well. Now, do you go to events to network? Well, what kind of events do you go to? Are you going to go there to an event that's just because there's an event happening, or is it a targeted event? You should know what events you should be attending. In fact, if I was you and you wanted to think about the next 6 months to 12 months, knowing that we're in the situation in the world whereby some of these events have been cancelled due to lockdowns, pandemics, and so forth, but book them into your calendar, register for them if you can. But my question to you is this: what's your intent to attend that event? Are you going for the sausage roll and a cup of tea? Or are you going there to meet 1, 2, or 3 key people and start to build a relationship at this event, and then take that and meet somewhere else at another time to continue to develop that relationship? I'm not talking about you being like a little puppy, a little dog with your tongue hanging out because there's a bone there, or there's somebody you wanted to meet and get something from somebody. I'm not talking about that. Your intention is to sow some seeds, but make sure you're targeting and getting the right people around you, or you're meeting the right people that are going to be important for you and them on an ongoing basis. So what's your intent around this networking and around meetings you want to go? Now, the best way to be a deliberate leader is decide to be deliberate. Number 2 would be show up as a deliberate leader. And number 3 would be to plan and think that will allow you to be more of a deliberate leader. If you start to think about things and not do things as autopilot or wing it, as they call it, or shoot from the hip, but if you're calculated and you know what you're doing, then you're going to be more deliberate in what you're doing as a leader. So here's some call to actions for you. Listeners, I want you to sit back and review, how are you as a leader today? Are you being deliberate? And if so, are you being deliberate enough? Could you increase that action that you're doing there, or that sort of being deliberate a little bit more? What happens if you were 2% more deliberate? What would that mean in a month or in a year's time by you being just 2% deliberate every day? And then the next thing would be, let's be deliberate about this podcast. As listeners, if you're getting value from this podcast, what I'd love you to do is 2 things. One is share it with 3 other people that you know. Get them to start listening to this podcast. Let's start attracting some really cool people. We've got fantastic listeners around the world, and of course, that's why we're getting some really good guests as well. But who else do you know that could be listening to this podcast and will get value from what's being shared? And the second part of that is that if you can put a review and a rating, whether you listen to this podcast on Apple or Spotify. On Apple, you can put a review and a rating. They'll ask you to put, there's 5 stars, and if it's a 5, click the 5, the 5th star, and put a review. And if you can write some things in there, some words about what you're getting from the podcast, but what it's doing for you. And if you're on Spotify recently have just released the ability to put a rating. And if you can do that, that'd be wonderful. So that'd be good. So be a deliberate leader. So as we go into the weekend, take time out now to reflect on you as a leader and ask yourself, am I a deliberate leader? Hey, listeners, what we as leaders know to be true is that change is constant. Change is incredibly scary, especially with the unknown and unfamiliar territory. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing. Look out for the episodes as they're being released. Download them, have a listen, put a review and a rating. Feel free to share them with your friends, your family, and your network. Hey, if there's any feedback you'd like to give me about the show, or if there's a question you have for the Ask Denis Freestyle episode, then send me an email, dennis@leadingchangepartners.com. Hey, listeners, it's always a pleasure being with you. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.